Hi,
Hello.
Tom. How's my sound?
Your sound is good.
Good.
How's my sound?
Excellent.
Good.
While we're setting up, it appears to me that Lombardi does not have the kind of sound quality the rest of us do. Have you noticed that?
The reason is he's sitting too far away from his computer.
Okay,
You notice when he does get up closer, um, it does improve.
okay.
But from our end, there's not too much we can do about it except to
Invite
well,
him
move
closer.
his computer a little closer to himself. If he wants to lounge back like this, he needs to find some way of moving his device. I think it's his computer uh, rather than a small device, but I'm not sure.
Uh,
But he's got to move it up a little.
your sound stayed very good, even when you leaned quite a bit back.
Well, I try to optimize it for, there are a variety of things that I can do to tweak it. The other thing is I've got my last computer, um, the screen went dead, and the cost of replacing the screen, which would be replacing the whole top half of the clamshell, was over $1,000.
Oh my. Oh,
And for $1,000, I was able to get a brand new, very high speed um, uh, um, Air, MacBook Air, which is what I recommended to you back when.
uh-huh.
Here comes new Bob.
Carpentier.
Good
There is
morning.
new Bob.
Hi.
Is that what it says?
That's what it says.
Welcome. You've got a nickname. How do you like it?
Uh, it's cute, but I'm going to rename to just simply Bob.
Simply Bob.
How are you guys?
Johnny, you go first.
It's nice to see you again.
It's good to be seen.
I like that. Yes.
I
Here
have
come
had
Fred and Frank, by the way.
Pardon?
Here come Fred and Frank.
Oh, good.
I've had a couple of excellent nights sleep, but before that, I had a bad reaction to some sleep aids, and so I'm just going back to the natural sleeping cycle. Hi, Fred. Hi, Frank.
Hi, Fred. Hi, Frank.
Hi, Frank. Frank. Hi, Fred.
Are you on the
They're out of
web?
this world again.
Are you on the Webb telescope, perhaps?
I have no idea why that's there.
Nice background, though.
Except I do remember that when I was at NAC, they used to call me Spacey.
Spacey. Oh,
And here comes George Farrick, at least his name.
that's been an adventure.
And
Look at Fred and George.
Fred and George are in the same place.
It's definite. Look at that. The planet twins
Yeah.
or the planetary twins.
Yeah, I was attracted to Spacey.
There you go,
Space.
Fred.
I was going to actually put up one of the latest Webb telescope shots, but I never got around to the time to. It would take me about 5 minutes to set it all up, but I never quite gave myself that time.
Yeah, how do you
What
do
an
that?
amazing scientific development, though. Wow.
Yeah,
Is that the Jupiter one? Did you want to put up the one of?
Well, I was thinking of one of those Jupiter ones, or the one that showed some detail that's not visible in visible light, and that Bard galaxy, Bard spiral, and There, almost all of those images are actually manipulated,
Yes.
and a
As
lot of
many
them
as
are now being
12
done by
overlap.
amateur astronomers who are also computer geeks who take the raw data. NASA publishes the raw data, which is just a series of categories and numbers, and they actually use various tools, including just Photoshop, to tweak
Back in
them
the,
and put them together.
How do you know that, Tom?
Well, I read that in some astronomy um, websites. One of the best. I think I forwarded it to you. Their latest newsletter is the Vatican Observatory Foundation.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I saw clips of that Jesuit brother
Yeah.
and he's fantastic. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I think he is fantastic. He, uh, he was a little bit of a late vocation. He certainly knows most of the people in his field, but and he chose to be a Jesuit brother. He didn't particularly want to be ordained for whatever reasons, and he of course was almost immediately put into the staff of the Vatican Observatory, and then when the previous guy Coyne, I think, retired or died, I'm not sure which. Uh, he was appointed to head the Vatican Observatory, and he himself has developed a considerable interest-raising and fundraising apparatus in that Vatican Observatory Foundation, which and he writes prolifically on the intersection of faith and science, and has some fantastic stuff on his. He also has a podcast, and he's given several lectures for that Now You Know Media.
Mhm.
Uh, One of them on a large series on the whole Galileo affair and the background to that. The Vatican Observatory is currently based in Flagstaff, Arizona, and they have their telescope up on one of the mountains in northern Arizona,
That's the Vatican Observatory?
the Vatican Observatory.
Uh-huh.
And
What's
so
what's
they
his
have a
name?
partnership. They have a partnership with the University of Arizona.
Okay. What's his name? What's the brother's name?
All right. A good Irish name.
See if you can pull it up.
Consolmagno.
What is it?
Consolmagno.
Okay.
Consolmagno.
Okay.
Brother Guy, Guy.
Yeah.
Of course, in Italy, he would be Guido.
Right.
If you're interested in looking a little bit more, there was an article earlier this week, within the last week or so, on citizen scientists, and it featured a young woman. She looked young anyway, but these days they're all looking younger.
They are.
But she literally is not a professional, quote, not part of NASA, not part of the organization, but just takes the raw data, and her photographs, including the most recent ones of Mars, are recreated using the technology. The article gets into it a little bit, and Tom did a great job explaining, sort of like you take
That might be.
I haven't a clue how it's done, but you take the numbers and you put them all together and stuff, but it blows me away. And there's this whole group of citizen scientists. And the fun part is she's a Californian from Modesto.
Yeah.
And Modesto, if you don't live in Modesto, everywhere else in the country, everywhere else in the state, you say, can anything good come out of Modesto?
I think Gallo Wines came out of Modesto.
And they spread all over the place. Yeah.
Yeah. that might be, I don't know, but there is one woman whose work I've run across, and it's really fascinating. Her name is Judy Schmidt, Schmidt. And I'll try to send some links, and I'll resend stuff about the Vatican Observatory. I contribute, I think it's $100 a year to be a member of their foundation,
Ah,
and thereby get a little insider stuff. But
nice.
the other thing that I've been I've been kind of had sort of a lifelong interest in astronomy. In fact, I probably would have been I probably would have gone in the direction of astronomy,
Hmm.
except for that horrible four-letter word that begins with M, math.
Oh,
Mathematics. Yeah. Once I ran into those odd-looking equations and all of that, they lost me. Anybody who could explain the concepts behind them, I was with. But once I got into the actual equations, I thought, I'm not ain't gonna deal with that.
Did Brother Guy give a TED talk? Tom, do you know?
Yes. Yeah.
That's where I saw him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other entryway into this Vatican Observatory stuff is my spiritual director, Jack Stager, Father Jack Stager, priest of Archdiocese of LA. His older brother, who died about 5 years ago of prostate cancer, but his older brother, Bill, was a highly regarded astrophysicist, a Jesuit astrophysicist, also working with the Vatican Observatory.
Hmm.
And he gave a very memorable retreat to the priests somewhere around 10 years ago, and kind of drew on the spirituality that scientific advancement leads to, or can lead to, or should lead to.
Aren't the priests at a meeting in La Quinta or something, or was that over?
I think that ended yesterday.
Okay.
Haven't heard anything about it.
Yeah, because I talked to Peter O'Reilly the other day and he told me about it. So
Yeah,
your neighbor.
yeah.
Yeah.
Was he going?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, he does. I'm finished with that kind of stuff, actually.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to leave it to others. There
I
is
understand.
Gary.
Hi, Gary.
Hi, Gary.
Hi,
Yeah,
Gary.
Hi, Gary.
Good morning. Good morning.
Gary.
Notice the space twins, Gary.
Yes.
George Ferrick and Fred Lawrence.
Yeah, they meeting again on planet Mars.
Yeah,
Kind of a spacey too, so
yeah.
how good is that? How good is
Tim
that?
Almy, if you got my last email, Tim Almy might be joining us by phone. He's in a place called, I forget where now, but the internet connection does not support video. So I suggested he try using just his cell phone in the phone mode rather than the data mode,
Uh-huh.
and sent him the link that includes the phone links for our Zoom conversation. So he may or may not manage successfully. I was kind of thinking that, occasionally there is somebody named George, both of them, who like to join us from the car. So we are treated to, watching the roof of your car most of the time.
We saw Ned last week in this car. He looked
Ned,
like
yeah, last
Right.
week too.
with his dark glasses there.
I'm going to keep setting it up for the phone, and I'll send along the phone connections. It might be more efficient
Yeah,
for you all to phone in. And then one of the advantages of that is it doesn't use cellular data. So you don't risk getting a $500 phone bill by
yeah.
surprise um, because you used up all that bandwidth.
Plus, I think it would be a more consistent connection
Hmm.
because I know when I was tuned in on the phone, it would go in and out depending on where I was. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Well,
So
let me
anyway,
put,
I will send the link. I'll send the total invitation rather than just the just the internet link. And that total the whole invitation contains the passcode and the meeting ID and the various phone numbers that you can use.
Tom, if you don't mind, I had a first experience with Facebook. I met with someone who said, let's use Facebook. Is that a potential for this, or does that not overlay with what we do?
It's a potential for this. Actually, you know, um, I have published the Coffee with Father Tom stuff that I did back when. Um, it was a Zoom meeting that also got posted on Facebook Live.
I see.
Um, I have two difficulties with it. One of which is I hate Facebook, and I won't use it for personal communication. I will only use it for um, getting stuff out there that I want to get out in a broader audience. So I don't use it for two-way.
And do you hate it for ethical, moral, and or other kind of reasons?
I think all of the above. Um, I do think that you're exposing yourself to hacking and that kind of stuff in a greater way than you are, say, on something like this.
Yeah.
But there are some privacy concerns. I think you can get around them, but you have to go through all kinds of intricacies to get around them. And to me, that's the problem.
No, thank you.
So I'd rather, if we can, stick to Zoom.
Amen.
Yes, this is
I vote yes.
enough for me.
Yeah, yeah.
But the most-
And you know, after having said that, you may find me popping up. I mean, I've got a very active Facebook page, which I never check except to post my own stuff on. And I've been doing that more rarely lately.
I'm one of these blessed people that doesn't have to do social media because I have a grown daughter who does them all, and she knows I just don't do social media for a variety of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And Catherine is her name. She works in the industry in Hollywood, and she just does all those kinds of things. And so anything of interest, which is primarily family and also related occasionally to churchy stuff and or an interest in science as well. She'll send stuff and say, this might be of interest, or this might be of interest. So I'm blessed to have like a private secretary who's really good with the computer. And so I'm spoiled nicely.
That's marvelous. It dawned on me also, as something seems to be dawning on Fred and George in their background, that we have not yet prayed. So I'm wondering if somebody might like to lead us impromptu or semi-prepared prayer.
yeah, let's see if I can find one. I had one that I thought might be apropos. If I can find it in 30 seconds, how's that?
Oh, that's good.
Let me check here. Here's an interesting book. I'll show this here. It's a huge, whoops, it's not working out, so, okay.
Oh, I was gonna say,
No,
this whole-
it period. Unfortunately, it thinks
It's a
at the back.
glare.
Yeah.
Fred, do you have a screen behind you? Is that what that is? I mean,
Is it a green screen?
Fred, the screen that you have that you sit,
I would say God only knows.
huh?
I don't know where it came from.
Probably not a green screen. Zoom is pretty good about separating you from your background
Without a green screen?
without a green screen. With a green screen, it works much better.
But I mean, but Fred and George have this like this planet behind them, and sometimes Bob has Hawaii behind him. And I
Yeah.
can't figure out if you've got something in your house, a screen that you sit in front of.
No, you just, I just discovered this by going to, where did I go? Huh.
This is of
I-
interest,
I went
perhaps
someplace down at the bottom of my screen.
in Zoom.
Yeah, it's a little up arrow next to the camera icon, the video icon.
Okay, yeah, it says choose virtual
You
background.
can choose a virtual
Oh.
background, Gary.
Yeah,
No, I'm not going to. I can't figure out how to do what I've done. Just getting on here is enough.
Me too.
That's about as
it'll
quick
give
as
you, yeah, but it'll give you a real thrill when you can do it.
Yeah, well, I
Welcome-
know. Well, I'll
welcome-
save it for
welcome to
another
the-
day.
Okay,
Yeah, welcome to the club, Gary, and a few others.
Yeah,
okay, well,
Well, it gives us a thrill too, because both of you are replacing the sun.
yes.
It's true.
The
the
sun
heads
is
are-
obscured behind your head.
Oh,
A
yeah.
lopsided halo around you.
I've been wondering how that, because like, well, Bob will get up to go get some coffee or something, and all of a sudden he'll sort of disappear into the background or whatever. It just.
Now, the other nifty thing that you can do in that same menu is blur your background.
Yeah, there's just no possible way. I don't even want to do it because my computer will explode.
is there a way of making yourself 30 years younger?
Yes, yes,
That's what I'm looking for.
yes.
Well, actually, there are video filters that might be able to do it. Like, there's a nice little one.
Oh, I see.
Is that a pet puppy there?
Yeah, of some sort.
Oh,
Or,
yeah, that's kind of cute. And I see your background is blurred,
yeah,
so that's good.
one of my favorites.
I don't have all that, and that's just fine.
I don't either. Yeah.
Yeah,
Let
one
me
of
see
my
what I'm
favorites.
doing.
I'm trying to find it.
How about
It's
this
Halo.
one? How about,
Oh, there's.
how about that?
You're even closer now.
Ah,
Yeah,
Only 35 minutes away.
that's right.
That's the Golden Gate, right?
I'm zooming in. Yeah, here's another one. Let's see.
Yeah. Oh,
Oh,
Aurora Borealis.
uh-huh.
But that's kind of distracting, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah,
It's beautiful, but distracting.
okay, yeah. So
Well,
I don't
here's
know
a nice
how,
one.
so how do we get to a Webb telescope photograph here? Here's an avatar. What the heck is that?
Oh, that'll be fun. Let's
Oh, that's
see.
kind of cool. Yeah, here we go.
Yeah, there you are.
Look at your ears.
Okay,
are you going to lead us into prayer now, whatever you are?
yes, yes, I have one.
Appropriately bovine.
How about this one? Let's see. Okay, yeah, I'm ready with the prayer.
He has a collar too.
How do I get out of this?
Right there.
I've said that a few times.
Up at the top, there's a item that says none.
None, okay. Share screen, I don't want to do that. Yeah, now I'm kind of, okay, I'll figure it out, but here's the prayer. Okay, we'll get back to that. Choose my background. Okay, I'll go back to Fred's. There we go. Okay, well, this was sent to me by the son of a good friend of mine who died, and he was going through his dad's belongings, and he sent me this. He said, so here it is. The prayer is, maybe you've seen this before. It's kind of, I don't know why this isn't turning out here. You see it? Whoops.
It's
It won't
Maybe that's,
stay.
Yeah, maybe that's because I have the background in, but
right.
here's
right.
here's a prayer. It's called "Let Your God Love You,"
Mm.
and it has a series of phrases. Okay, so be silent, be still, alone, empty before your God. Say nothing, ask nothing, be silent, be still. Let him look upon you. That is all. He knows and understands. He loves you with an enormous love, wanting only to look upon you with love. Quiet, still, be. Let your God love you. That's it.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Amen and amen.
Can you send that to us, please?
Sure, I'll be glad to.
Yeah, definitely. I do what's called a 3-minute retreat every day. And it right side up or upside down.
George.
Eric,
I'm
you're
having,
having fun with us today.
Well,
Okay.
once you get into those settings, you can have
they can
just
drive you
enough of-
crazy.
Or at least drive us crazy.
Yeah.
Well, I have 2 little goodies to share at the beginning. Just kind of one's a promo. I sent an email out just before the session about an online event which began Wednesday night, and then tonight there's a talk. Tomorrow there are 2 talks, and Sunday another talk. It's kind of like a presentation on the topic of love and death by Frank Ostaseki. He was a chaplain at the San Francisco Zen Hospice for many years. And my wife discovered him, went to a retreat at Spirit Rock, which is a place in Marin County. Gary, have you heard of Spirit Rock?
No.
Yeah, it's in
I know of it too.
yeah, it's in Marin County. It's kind of a insight meditation, a Zen Buddhist center for different speakers and meditation sessions and retreats and so forth. Anyway, so she's been reading Frank Ostaseski's book, which I put into the email, and there's a retreat this weekend starting tonight where he gives talks, and another speaker called Joan Halifax, who's a Zen, I think, teacher in New Mexico. So they're giving some talks on the theme of love and death. And in the email I sent you, it's a quote from Rilke, the poet, and I won't get into it, but if anybody's interested, there's no charge. They encourage a little donation. And you can, if you register, you don't have to actually be there when they give the talks. You get access to them later. But it's very interesting. We all have, I think, friends who have died and friends who are dying, and we're in the exit row ourselves, so to speak, as someone put it. And so I think plus how many of, I mean, Gary and Frank, you're always going to funerals, and Tom, you just came from one. So, death is something that we're familiar with. Even in my life, I've had the death of 7 dogs and 5 cats whom I've been present at. And it's always a kind of a mystery when we're there with our pet and the vet gives a shot of something to kind of calm the pet down, and then another shot, and then all of a sudden breathing stops. It's just and it's so final, there's no more conversation, no more showing up the next day, that type of thing. So the finality of it kind of struck me when we lost our 3 pets in 1 year. And then good friends, of course. So the theme of death has been on my mind and meditating on it and so forth, and just kind of getting to the point where I see it as part of living. And that the Buddhists say that everything which is a composite will dissolve, will come apart. So whereas a stone is very simple and that could exist for hundreds of years, we who are more complex and have consciousness paradoxically live for a far shorter period of time. Anyway, so this is on this evening, tomorrow, and Sunday, 2 talks with different meditations. Again, it's something where if you registered, you could tune into live if you wanted to, or you could listen to these talks afterwards if you think it's worthwhile. So I just share that with you. And the second thing, hi, George.
Hi, George.
George,
George.
George, before you move to that second thing, are you interruptible? If not, I can
Yes,
wait.
sure.
Oh,
Interrupt me.
Yeah, I just want to comment on the link to the talk, Love and Death, that you sent,
Yes.
which I listened to last night, and it's a gem. It's about a half hour, 40 minutes long. And I sent you a note right away, basically.
Right. I saw that. Yeah.
That's a man who knows. And it connected with my experience of training at the Palo Alto VA Hospital in a interdisciplinary palliative and hospice care fellowship, which I did back in 2011, 2012. Very amazing, intensive program, faculty from the Stanford Medical School. They abut one another, similar campuses and stuff. And one of the palliative care docs, one of our trainers, teachers, was identified as Buddhist. And so his presentation sort of reminded me, took me right back there, and I went, "Ooh, this is very quite familiar," and how good. Like, it's really worth listening to. It's really a meditation in itself and a reflection, and it turned out to be my evening prayer last night.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. Yeah.
So I really liked it, and
So I put that link into the message this morning too, if any of you wants to tune into it.
yeah.
It's something that it's coming from a monastery in New Mexico called Upawa, which is a Zen monastery. And Frank Ostaseski is off-site, but he's, just like he's doing a Zoom presentation. And if you wanted to just tune into the first few minutes of the talk and see what you think of him. But I just share it with you because others may be concerned about this theme.
Yeah, I interrupted you. You were going to point number 2. Maybe
Point number 2, yeah. Let me just say one more thing. I was very, I don't want to say impressed and moved at the same time at the prior meeting where many of you shared the types of meditation that you do. Ned, you mentioned
Yes.
meditating, and it seemed like everybody here does some type of meditation or some contemplative, quiet type of prayer type of thing. And one that, Herbert Benson was the name of the Harvard professor, the relaxation response way back at the beginning.
Yeah.
Another person was a Benedictine, John Main,
Mhm.
who founded the International Christian Meditation Society. And he ended up with suggesting a mantra called Maranatha, just saying Maranatha is an example, but a person could choose whatever they wanted to. But it's interesting because it actually struck me that Maranatha, come Lord Jesus, is it was actually kind of a preparation for dying, doing that faithfully, come Lord Jesus. And then I twist it around and say, may I come, Lord Jesus, type of thing, twisting, kind of inverting it. But I just mentioned that, Maranatha, but the meditation that takes place, if you tune into this workshop that I'm mentioning, it shows like a half dozen Zen people there meditating, and it's very powerful. Just if you wanted to take your meditation and do it at this event, it's really a very powerful sense of people really getting into the spirit there.
You know, I was thinking about, we were talking about last week. I think we all have been drawn. I'm wondering a couple of things. I wonder if it's just a function of, or it's a natural progression. My Warren Holleran is no longer, I'm not able to visit with him, or at least do spiritual direction with him. But I've been seeing a friend of mine named Tony McGuire, who also lives where Warren lives. And he shared with me a book that I've just ordered. And Bob Bennett had this speaker at their last conference, their last, Tom, what is it, that the Association of Catholic Priests.
Right.
It's a priest from Peoria, I forget his name right now, but it's called From Hero to Servant to Mystic. It's about priestly spirituality. And I'm just wondering if it's just kind of a natural progression that you eventually get to the point where you're tired of talking so much, and all you want to do is just really be in God's presence. That's what centering prayer is all about. Just to be in the present, like that prayer that you just read, George. It's that. But I also wonder, what about people who are outrageous extroverts? I just wonder if they have, if that's a kind of a spirituality that's more suited to people who have a personality that's more or less, not necessarily introverted, but is not so far away from being introverted.
I think the extroverts, don't you think they get tired as they get older?
I would get exhausted. I think so. Yeah.
Also, I mean, I think it's Susan Cain in her book Quiet. She doesn't make actually a clear cleavage between an extrovert and introvert. There's an introverted aspect to every extrovert,
Right?
and there's something of an extroverted aspect, maybe not as strong, to every introvert.
Yeah.
And so it seems to me that the contemplative instinct, while it does have something to do with age, I think you're right. I think also at the same point, it's not limited to that. I think there's a certain sense in which being a straight out introvert does not mean that you don't have moments of, straight out extrovert doesn't mean you have moments when you really value introverted moments or contemplative moments or things like that.
Yeah, that's a nice summary, Frank, of what Jung actually said. From about midlife on, you begin to really get in touch with your inferior functions. So for a person who's been primarily extroverted, even extremely extroverted, it's sort of an automatic process. It's the yin and yang, the balance. You start getting in touch with and appreciative of the flip side, the more introverted.
And Richard Rohr has, I think, done a lot of good stuff along those lines. Even the name of his Center for Action and Contemplation.
Right.
And he related, I think, in one of his newsletters, I think it was this week, because he's talking about how contemplation needs to lead to action. Without action, contemplation goes from the presence of God to the presence of yourself and becomes navel gazing, which is very easy for introverts to do. Just like it's very easy for extroverts to get lost in action, in busyness. And I think Rohr's point is that, to be complete, contemplation needs to unfold itself in action, and to be complete, action needs to be powered by contemplation. And I think for an introvert like myself, moving from the quiet into actually going out and relating to people in a healthy and positive way and putting myself on the line outwardly, that is a real chore. And I think for an extrovert to pull away from stuff into the prayer of quiet, I think that's a chore. So
I agree with that. I mean, that to some extent is something of the challenge I feel I'm going through right now in terms of learning how to retire.
mm.
Yeah.
It was a mistake. You shouldn't have done it.
Welcome,
That comes-
George.
You should
That
follow
comes
Fred's,
to me at-
you
that
should follow
comes to me at
Fred's
moments
example.
too, George.
If I may,
The sign of
when-
a character defect, friend.
when I hear the term extrovert, I immediately think of Louis Del Castillo. And Ned and George, I don't know if you share that, but you got to know him a lot as he moved through life too. Did you experience him moving to contemplation?
Very much so.
Yeah.
I don't know. He said he was, but do you think, Ned, that
Yeah, I was with him
a
several times
lot at the end of his life?
when we, in his car, for instance, we'd stop the car in some beautiful place, desert one time, up in the mountains, beautiful pine trees all around us. And we'd just be quiet. And it was an experience. You know, David Brooks talks about getting home and seeing his children playing, 3 children playing, rolling over themselves, laughing, just and he says reality just sort of spills over, and you get into this transcendent place that you almost feel not worthy of. And I've had that experience with Lou. You know, speaking of death, when I was coming home from a long trip, and on the way home from the airport, we get a call from Marlene, my wife, and she said, "Oh, good, you're on your way. Please hurry." And I heard in her voice something that was not, you know, it was very anxious, and she was trying to be calm. And I finally got it out of her, and she said, "Lou Del Castillo, Georgiana just called and said he had a heart attack and he died." I've never had the experience that I did on the freeway, on the way home. First, I was angry with God. I've never been angry with God before. Just so angry. And I had to stop and yell at him because of the finality of it, which you were talking about, George. And anyway, yeah, I did find, and that when you have that experience, George and I, you and I have had somewhat experience like that. There's a, I don't know what to call it. It's not camaraderie. It's not, there's sort of a shared presence of God that one has. And that relationship becomes sacred somehow. Anyway, yeah, I thought he was on his way to contemplation, and we were there, I think. Yeah. And I agree, Frank, or Tom, George. It can be a feature of age.
You know, I wonder too if it might just be the progression. As you pray, you, at least, you know, I've always often shared in sessions on prayer, in our school and in talks to just my own journey. You start off with formal prayer, and then eventually you get tired of,
Recitation.
saying prayers, and
Yeah.
then you
Yeah.
just want to talk. I always remember one time in the seminary, it was one of those nights. Remember when I don't know if we were on retreat. We might have been on retreat, in those week-long things. And then it was when that the east wind would come up, and the moon would be very bright, and that wind would sweep in from the east, and it'd be hot and dry. Remember you get those all the time in Southern California, when the Santa Ana winds come up, and your pages curl on the book because of it's so dry. But the nights, it seems to me that it occurs, at least at this one particular time, it occurred, the moon was so bright, you could see your shadow. When I walked out to what was called the Point, it was then it was nothing. Now it's a housing development. But I walked out there and I just started talking out loud to God, and I just allowed myself to. It's like that Eli that said, Hannah, who goes into the temple, and she said, "I'm just a lonely old woman pouring my troubles out to the Lord," and I just remember just saying, I don't know if I'm talking to myself or to you, but I just let myself go. And that was a strong movement from saying formal prayers to just letting myself go. But then I got tired of that and just wanted to kind of be listening or be in the presence of. I just wonder if it's a normal progression that happens to people who begin to try to pray. Eventually they just get tired of all the words and they just want to kind of be in the presence.
It may not be a function of age, although I think age has a lot to do with it, given our journeys. But I've always been kind of stuck when I hear or read somebody say that contemplation is the highest form of prayer. That if you don't get there, you're missing a whole lot. And I'm thinking, lots of folks don't get to contemplation, maybe. But it's something that you can find yourself doing. I found it in so much chaos when I was, as I mentioned to you guys, when I was in law school and working, had a family, and wondering how the hell I was going to respond appropriately to the reality around me when there were so very important things going on, and that took me to Benson and to meditation, and then I think contemplation. So maybe suffering or an awareness of the chaos that kind of moves one to need to be, just to be, and to be in the presence of God.
But then there's a way that you can do it while you're doing the chores. For example, there's a good friend who just received a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. And I know another good friend of mine got that diagnosis and was dead in 3 weeks, died pretty suddenly. And so I don't know how to reach out to this person exactly. I don't think she's a believer or anything. But what I'm doing is, like the other day when I was fixing salad for lunch and I was cutting up some small tomatoes into quarters, I was just kind of thinking of her, or you could be aware of just the presence. Let's call it the presence, God or whatever, or it could be cleaning the bathroom, like Brother Lawrence. Some of you mentioned Brother Lawrence, or Teresa of Lisieux. She talked about doing the little things mindfully and so forth. So I think there's a way in which it all becomes together, don't you think, Ned? That you don't have to go apart and sit on some pad.
Yes.
But after a while, you can bring that kind of sense to whatever you're doing. It could be out cycling, or you could be whatever.
That's the genius, I think, of Ignatius's examination of consciousness. That we learned it in the seminary as the examination of conscience. You know, you had to sit there and think
Exactly.
of all the things you did wrong. And the more modern Jesuit approach is that you just reflect on the day to see where you were in the presence of God, and where God touched you and how you responded, and which just lead you to reflect on where, if Ignatius said you're finding God in all things, then you're going to find it in the little things. They're all saying the same thing in a different way, it sounds to me like.
I agree.
Yeah,
No,
I just,
I'm-
uh,
Go ahead.
well, a parallel question. We're talking about in the case of males, there's sort of a softening that is part of this process, I think. And several of those of us who have had children and then grandchildren, when we talk about that, are always astonished at the difference one feels towards one's grandchildren than he did towards one's children at similar stages of development. I mean, the love of the grandchildren, I think, is Ned and Bremer and I have experienced it, is just far more consuming somehow, and deeper than the love of one's own kid when your kid is 4 or 5. Is contrasted to the grandkid at 4 or 5. And that certainly, as a certain prelate would have said, a mystery, at least to me.
Stewie.
Fred, don't you have your grandkids living with you?
Yes.
In light of what George is saying, do you?
Well, I couldn't contrast my feelings for my grandchildren with my feelings for my kids. And it could be that it's because I don't remember very well, but still the memory I have, I still have a feeling for the children. So it's hard for me to distinguish the way George did. But I think it's lovely that that kind of clarification by contrast is beautiful, because that experience that you might have had with your children, you're catching up with it with your grandchildren.
Yeah, that could be, because the 3 guys I mentioned, Ned, John, and I, we're all fairly hard driving, gotta make my mark on the world, and achievement oriented guys. And maybe it's simply we don't have that distraction as much.
I think that's a big part of it, George. I agree.
I think you nailed it. This resume virtues.
Here comes Bob Bono.
Hey,
Bobby.
is it Bono or Bonet?
Bono.
Bono.
Bono. Okay. Hi, Bob.
Hello.
Hello, Bob. There's a discussion how to pronounce your last name.
We've been struggling with that for the whole session.
You going to confession tomorrow, Crook?
No.
Welcome, Bob.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you.
Sorry to be so late.
So would you give us your own correct pronunciation of your last name?
Bono.
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 If I was a good Frenchman, it would be Bono.
It's still easier Bob Bono than Bob Charpentier.
Yeah, that fits.
What it's about. The comments about grandparenting. As a grandparent, I was struck by the line some comedian right on target said, "Had I known it would be such fun being a grandparent, I would have skipped the first part."
Yeah. Bob,
You
we've
know
been
that-
talking about contemplation, contemplative prayer, and leading into all kinds of things. Started out with love and death, and so hit the ground running, Bob.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry I missed it. I'm
You
down
c-
in Nashville now, so
Oh,
Oh,
it's
when
a whole
you,
new dimension.
oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
don't have your,
my brother, they found that he had cancer a couple of weeks ago.
oh,
So he had some serious surgery, and and he's had some radiation, and he faces probably a couple more months of treatment before he's really back, hopefully in good shape.
What kind of cancer, Bob?
It got into his. It was a tumor that was apparently on his stomach. It hit his liver in part, and it hit his esophagus. And so
Wow.
they did surgery to remove the tumor, but there were elements of it that they weren't able to eliminate in the liver or in the esophagus. And he was bleeding a fair amount from the esophagus. They've got that fixed. And he's back. His blood is built up, and he's doing very well. But he has, he's got to have a lot of medicine and so forth at this point to deal with the situation. So he's still struggling, but every day it's a bit better. So on we go.
Bob, how old is he?
He's a year younger than I am.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason I ask is it sounds a little bit like it's the traditional, approach to treating cancers: burn, slash, and poison. And
Yeah.
there are some brand new techniques out there for certain kinds of cancers that are genetically based and immunotherapy approaches. And so, but it doesn't sound like this one, because it sounds like there has been some metastases to other vital organs.
Yes, that's right. I don't have a full grasp of it all, but I just know that he was in the hospital for a week and a half, and then 2 days ago he came back to his apartment, and so I'm down here with him and his daughter, one daughter who lives 30, 40 miles from here. But she was trained as a nurse, never was able to finish her 4th year, but she's very knowledgeable about hospitals and medical things and those sorts of things. So she's very much involved here as well, but she lives with her family off down the way. She's here right now doing her work on her computer and making sure that Dave has all the right stuff that he needs. He had an appointment this morning, and Percy was with him with his doctor, who really did a wonderful thing, because Dave suffered for 3 months, not knowing why his one leg was virtually, no sensation in it. And he thought it was a sciatica problem. And it took him a while to find it. And so he was going to a bone and joint hospital here. And when they found out that no, that's not going to do, you got to go down to the oncology hospital. And so that was over. And happily, this one doctor, Dave had an appointment with him, but it was like, I'm going to say 7 or 10 days later. And Dave was, he was really starting to hurt. And he called the doctor, and the doctor said, do you have any reports of the MRIs you went through? And Dave said, yes. And the doctor asked him to read some of it for me, will you? And he read 3 points out of the whole document. And the doctor said, thank you very much. I'll call you back in a half an hour. And in a half an hour, he had him sent down to the Centennial Ecology Center in downtown Nashville. And so the next morning, the doctor did surgery on him and removed the tumor. And then, you know, he started getting the treatment. So he's coming along. He's
Good.
coming along.
Good, good.
How's his morale and spirit?
Very good. Very positive. You know, he's a gentle soul, if I can put it that way. A very upbeat. He's a Notre Damer. You know, he's got to be an upbeat guy.
Are you
There's
going to be
always,
there?
there's always a Hail Mary pass.
That's right. That's right.
Are you going
Oh,
to be
coming
here?
along.
Are you going to be there a while, Bob?
Well, I'm for sure going to be down here until the end of September. I have a couple of responsibilities that are booked in October, one in Ohio and one out in Washington State. Depending on how this unfolds, because those are two unbound appointments that I have for them, assignments. I had to cancel one that was supposed to be in September down in Washington, but I canceled out of that so I could be down here.
Oh,
But I think by the end of September, I can probably handle those 2 weekends. And then, you know, if he still needs me down here, then I'll come back down here. But we're supposed to go to Barcelona then
Yeah.
in November together on a cruise. So,
okay.
you know, there's some uncertainties that still have to kind of get pressed out.
You know, what we're sort of doing in this conversation is sidling up to the subject of death a bit, right?
Yeah.
And
not-
it looms at our ages. Let me see if anything comes of this thought. When I was 45, I was diagnosed with an ailment called hemochromatosis, which means your body just simply does not get rid of iron. And you die from it. You know, that's what you do. And it was a death sentence well into the 1950s. And then somebody, God bless him, figured out, hey, wait a second. We could take blood from this guy, but we throw that away. His body, and replacing the blood, says, oh, I need some iron for my blood, and leaches it out, so to speak, not an appropriate term, from your organs. And lo and behold, you're supposed to have a normal life expectancy. So here I am, 80. You know, Ned's referred me and a colleague a case of his brother-in-law who had the same thing and died in his 50s. I was 45 when diagnosed. It's supposed to pop up in your system at middle age for men. And I was 45, you know, the stereotypical number. And Ned's brother-in-law, Michael, I remember we were sitting there reviewing his medical records, and his first medical record that we had, he had an iron count that was virtually identical to my earliest iron count at age 45. At his iron count at age 45 or 6, or, you know, that vicinity was almost the same. And I'm sitting there now in my 70s. This was a while ago, looking at this, and I said, my God, you know, he's dead and I'm alive. And yet we started with the same iron count, ferritin count. And the difference was I just casually, not knowing anything was wrong, went to see a renowned doctor for a checkup. You remember Walter Klein, Ned? He referred me to Donald. And I mean, how mysterious. I mean, Ned's brother-in-law, Michael, same count at the beginning. And 10 years later, he was dead. And here I was roughly 30 years later, you know, still, in theory at least, flourishing. And it makes for, I don't know what it makes for. It makes for gratitude is one thing it makes for. You know, that bullet flew by my ear and I didn't even hear it at the time.
Do you still
And-
visit? Do you still visit with the vampires every 2 to 3 months?
Yeah. Well, now, no, not really. Not in their vampire capacity. because
No
I-
bloodletting. No bloodletting
No
regularly.
more. I'm no longer the Middle Ages patient.
Yeah. Reason I'm asking, George, is that you mentioned aged. I had a very, he really was my best friend. We visited with FaceTime daily for over the 3 years of the last years of his life. And he was diagnosed at midlife also with it. He lived to 93, and it really was not a significant factor in his dying. And we used to joke about the fact he was Canadian, lived in Vancouver. Initially, they let him take the blood that home because he was also into roses. And if you don't know, roses are vampires. They thrive on iron. And so we had some of the most beautiful roses on Spring Island out in the Gulf Islands. But then they started thinking about it and they went, no, you can't do that anymore. And I went, oh, too bad.
Yeah. Did he refer to his physicians as his vampires?
No, I did. And he.
Oh,
we used
well,
to-
that's what
we
I
used to-
call Mike. I said,
Oh.
I got to go see my vampire.
Yeah, we used to have a
Oh.
good laugh about it. I went, he's still seeing the vampires regularly. Yeah. But interestingly, in much later, in the last like 10 years of his life, he really didn't need to see them anymore. And
That's it. Your metabolism just slows.
that's apparently what happens.
Yeah. Well, I now have shifted inexplicably. They don't know why. Too much iron to not enough iron, and now they're treating me for anemia. I think I prefer hemochromatosis, really. But
So are you eating a lot of spinach, George?
some, yeah,
Yeah.
I picked it up.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go in this afternoon for a shot because my red blood cell is just falling. And so I'm going in for this series of shots, and they cost more than $1,000 a shot.
Oh, wow.
I mean, as the doctor said, George, doesn't mean a thing. I don't make $1,000 on it. It's Medicare. And you don't pay $1,000. You pay nothing. So it's funny money. But that's when they did my spine marrow, yeah, that's what you call it, biopsy. The cost of that was $74,000. So I'm getting my piece of the action from the taxpayers of our glorious land. But
There's so much that goes into Medicare, supplementary insurance. It's crazy. It's utterly crazy.
Well, do any of you pay attention to the Medicare explanation of benefits that come out for every payment that's made, or your supplemental explanation of benefits, the EOBs? If you look at those, the actual amount that is paid to the provider is far less than what they're billed. And I find that absolutely fascinating, that there might be a bill for $1,500, $2,000, and they might get $200 for that.
Yeah, I following this diagnoses, then I had cancer of the prostate, and so I figured, wait a minute, I dodged the greatest cause of death among men, prostate cancer. And you know what? Statistically, that doesn't increase your life expectancy. You eliminate the leading cause of death for people like you, i.e. men, statistically, it has no meaning as to your life expectancy. Now, I don't understand that, but I know I'm filibustering, and I'm sorry. But let me draw this to a close. I was talking to my brother recently about dying, and I said, Ricky, I think the way I should look at it when it comes, if provided it's not an auto accident or a murder or something, is this is like a new case, or this is like a job. And now my job is to die, and is to die well, is to die with faith, is to die to the extent I can manage it with joy, and is to die leaving a legacy to my children and grandchildren of how to die, grandchild. And he said, close, but no cigar. It's not, in his view, it's not quite that. The summons is like Jesus on the cross, to hand ourselves back to God, to give ourselves back, and I obviously that's a lot more profound than my musings, but he's a bishop, they should be.
Well, that resonates with my first real experience with death and dying. Was a young nun. I may have told the story before.
Oh, you did. I remember, Tom.
Yeah, where in the course of the year after her diagnosis until she actually died, she went from being ready to handing herself over. And I felt very privileged to be able to be witness and to be part of that project.
A few times I wondered, in contemplative prayer, when you are, I don't try to feel anything. I just try to spend time and then let it go wherever it goes. But there are times all of us have been caught up into some kind of mystical experience where we just feel this, you just feel that whatever it is, and I'm wondering if, I've thought at times maybe death is finally just allowing yourself to sink into that
reality.
Well, it may be the end of separation.
Yes. Yeah.
But aging, excuse me, aging, it seems to me, it's the process of getting there. Someone just sent me a card, and it's from Rumi. It says, "We're all just walking each other home."
It's a good one.
And so I don't know if you're familiar with John Shelby Spong.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
Spong's
in
cool.
one,
Bishop Spong?
yeah.
You mean
Yeah.
Bishop Spong? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So before he died, he said, the interesting thing that happened to him was that the things that he believed most deeply were the things that he was left with. And there's a certain sense of off-putting clutter. And it seems to me that the contemplative instinct is to some side putting aside clutter. So for instance, as I aged, I more and more, the Eucharist became central to me. I didn't care who was canonized. I didn't care about a lot of these other things. So it seems to me that as we go on the journey, as we're walking ourselves home, so to speak, we begin to focus in on those things that will bring us their best and kind of slowly put aside those things that will distract us from it. And I think that's kind of where, as for the death thing, I've just been re-diagnosed with prostate cancer. I had it 10 years ago. So now my doctors are trying to figure out what should they do? Anything? Because I'm almost 80 years old, and it's very different from when I had it when I was 68 or 69.
Is it slow growing?
Well, it's a little more aggressive than it was before, but the bad news is I have it. The good news, it's confined to the prostate.
Yeah.
So the
now,
question is, if they give me hormone therapy, that could affect me mentally, or where it wasn't an issue when I was 69, or I had open heart surgery, it can affect my heart, etc. So I mean, all of that, when I see my doctor writing down that, well, he has already beat the average age for the American male at 78, that kind of has a little impact on you.
Yeah, it does.
And so,
Yeah,
Yeah, you're in the
So
bonus years.
so it says, it says, I can't argue with that. So how is that going to help me on the road on my walk home? And I think the contemplative thing is that, as I get older, I sit around here in my house and I see all this stuff and I say, oh my God, I got to clean this out. I can't leave this to my kids. I got to get rid of all this clutter. Are we kind of offloading some religious clutter by going deeply or seeking more deeply to solidify our relationship and the presence of God in our lives?
Yeah, good metaphor.
You're right, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's beautiful,
Takes me
Frank.
back, Tom, to your remark about Richard Rohr and his Center for Action and Contemplation. And what I took away, I spent some time there on a retreat, and what I took away was not much reflection on death, but each day a call to contemplation and action. What am I called to do? And I don't enjoy the thought of too much reflection on death. I enjoy the thought of when the time comes, my job is over. And I trust the Lord that in the meantime, look at both contemplation and action on a daily basis. I don't know, Gary, if that relates to what you were saying. I think it does.
I think the action part flows. I mean, can kind of flow. It'll come. I mean, I told Warren Holler one day, I said, I've done enough action. I want to do some navel gazing for a while. That's what I want to do now. I'm tired of, I've done a lot of the action part. But I had the other day, a friend of mine, I was talking to this friend of mine, he's about 83 or 84 now. And he was just diagnosed with what is called carcinoma of the prostate. It's a very rare kind of thing, and it's fatal. And I had a doctor friend called me and told me about Herb. So I called Herb. Herb finally called me back, and he was very upbeat. And he said, I said, I always say, well, you are in your, it's almost like Frank, the doctors say, well, you've already
beat the odds.
What the heck? And maybe he's right. I don't know. Sometimes, the cure is worse than the illness for some people, it seems to me. But anyway, but Herb said to me, he said, this is going to get me, but it's not going to get me down. And I was very impressed with that attitude. He's going to still, because I said, Fred, I said, Herb, I said, I've told a lot of people, and I don't know if I can take my own advice when that time comes. But I said, don't die before you're dead. I mean, you're still alive. You've got to be doing whatever you can do now, and but the way he said it, it's going to get me, but it's not going to get me down. So he's planning
That's
on
a keeper. That's a real keeper.
Yeah, it's a great line. I mean, it's a great attitude.
Yeah.
I'd like to have that attitude, But I think I know we're all. I mean, Tim is the one who's always reminding us that we are now on the glide path in. I don't know, but
yeah, but when you start being able to distinguish individual houses, swimming pools, telephone poles.
Speaking of
Those
which,
are going
George,
down.
did you happen to see in the news about, I think it was a flight from Mexico where the one engine caught fire and these people, I think they maybe had an hour riding to the airport wondering if they were gonna lose it all with that engine on fire. Did you read about that?
No.
Didn't see that. No.
I put myself in a thought. I'm sitting in the window seat looking out
Yeah.
at the engine on fire, and we're what, 18,000 feet above the earth and an hour from safe landing. Holy mackerel.
Imperial Highway is, you can see it.
Well, you know, I think also
Clotheslines.
it has something to do when we talk about death with our customs in this country, which are very different from what they are in the rest of the world. You know, death is kind of an unnatural kind of turn off the switch in our experience, where I think it's you know, like more agrarian societies or societies where people are more subject to die much more quickly and, you know, because of disease or violence or all that kind of thing. It has a different impact. And one of the things struck me was I was with a friend as he was dying on time. For about 3.5 hours, I'm sitting there and he's totally unresponsive. And I'm saying to myself, I wonder what's going on. Rather than being a switch off, is the Lord like the father of the prodigal son coming down off the thing to come to get us?
Yeah.
So is it a kind of a process that begins a long time, and the Lord is actually inching towards us down the road, rather than simply being there waiting to open the narrow door?
Yeah, I like that, Frank.
And I think that's a kind of works against some of the thing about, you know, that in our country, you know, so you display someone after they've died. And, you know, when I was a kid, my mother and father would go to a wake and they'd come home and I'd say, how do they look? Well, they look dead, you know, that, you know. So
most people don't look good dead.
Right, but your funeral directors and our things try to make them look like they're not dead, try to deny it.
Yeah.
Oh, there he is.
Hey, Fred, I have a wonderment. I think you're the senior among us. And I remember our communication, I think it was in a NAC conversation sometime back. And you used this fascinating image as the issue got closer to end of life. And you described it sort of as being up on the high diving platform, contemplating the deep pool down below. Do you remember saying something like that? Or I think you're probably, if you don't, you're capable of.
No, I was thinking of the same thing during this whole conversation.
Love to hear your take.
We're all waiting in line to take the dive. And we'll go and we're called.
That's
And
right. Yeah.
and it's if you had good experiences diving, it's not so bad.
Sometimes, you know, you say people die like they lived. Not always, but there is something to that from having observed quite a few deaths as a palliative hospice chaplain over the years, the last 10 in particular. There's something to that. You know, and another statement relating to death is, death is nothing, but the dying can be a bitch.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to that.
That was Herbert's line, remember that?
And
Yes,
this image just used now about how in the dying process, for a lot of people, whether the use of God is explicit or not, but God begins to fill in the empty spaces and take over more and more as the person becomes more and more quiet. It reminded me of a statement, a reading I had come across, a quote from Teilhard de Chardin, basically relating to the loss of mental faculties as part of the aging process. And he basically said that as the person's personality, because of mental illness, begins to more and more disappear, God sort of comes and fills in the empty spaces. I really like that image. And I think that's also true for the dying process.
You know, I recently read a book on the 8th Air Force in World War II. And it was absolutely mind-blowing. By March of 1943, you know, we were taking the day bombing raids over in Germany, and the Brits were taking the night raids. And the Brits had the better deal, man. You know, until about March of 43, till we got Mustangs up there to escort the B-17s and B-24s, it was a slaughterhouse. The 8th Air Force lost more guys over the skies of Europe than the whole United States Marine Corps lost in World War II. You know, 230,000, I think it was. And I mean, could you imagine that? I mean, yeah, most of us seen what, the Memphis Belle, I guess, is the movie on it. I mean, it's unbelievable that just these guys were slowly going insane. You know, and they said, well, if you survive 25 missions, we'll send you home. Well, that was last week. That was 35. And it eventually got up to, I think, 50. And the average survivability was like 18 missions or something. And these guys went out there in the morning, you know, with their cup of coffee in hand, climbed into those B-17s, and off they went, knowing fully well what was going to happen.
On the diving board, Fred.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, I just want to see how guys do that.
Like Frank, I've had these serious heart conditions and COPD. So I realize I'm living on borrowed time, and I'm certainly grateful for every day I get to be alive. It's funny though, because my wife is alive and old like me, and I have a hard time thinking of her dying. That's really a hard thing to think about for me. Luckily, she just walked out the room, so.
Well, I experienced that, Fred, about 7.5 years ago.
Yeah.
And I experienced
I
it.
understand what you're saying.
I experienced it 12 years ago.
Yeah.
Very sudden.
Oh, really? It
Well,
was sudden.
Sudden in terms of a fairly lengthy marriage and a good marriage, over 10 months from diagnosis to her death for a gynecological cancer that today is amenable, the kind of cancer that she had, to kind of immunological intervention. And that made it much tougher. And in most cases, the kind of cancer that she had, typically a hysterectomy cured it in 90% of women's cases, and in 10%, no matter what they did. And they did. She was a physician, so she was in the medical community here in the Berkeley area. And So she knew everybody and everybody knew her. She had a medical practice here, and she was also on the faculty of the medical school in San Francisco at UCSF. So she was very well known in the area, pretty special woman. And, but 9 months, nine months, almost to the day of diagnosis. And she was in hospice and palliative care for the last few months of her life, and just continued to do her medical practice as long as she could. And she literally lived until she died. She, as was classic for Mary Alice, the day before she died, she gathered not only family, but friends making calls. She said, "You'll find stashed in the back of that cooler refrigerator downstairs, Bob, a magnum of my favorite champagne. Grab it. Pass out the glasses." And 24 hours before she died.
Yeah.
Just
God rest her. What a saintly thing to do.
She was giving you palliative care.
bingo, Fred. Absolutely right on. Yeah. And
My wife was had a stroke 12 years before she died. So
Oh.
she was disabled for 12 years.
wow.
On the day of the stroke, the doctors told us to assemble the family. She wouldn't survive the weekend, but she lived 12 years. And so we were able to go out, and she had to use the wheelchair, of course, and all that kind of thing. But died very suddenly. In the morning, I got her up, she went to the bathroom, back to bed. And I said, "I'll be back at 9 o'clock. I went in at 9. I was here 30 feet away. Went in at 9 o'clock and she was dead. And so it was kind of very sudden, even though, you know, I knew something like this would come over the span of 12 years. So, and it's different, you know, the experience you go through is different in terms of how people die and when they die, and sudden death is different from long lingering death. Or,
Yeah.
you know, in her case, I expected someday something like this would happen, but, you know, the difficult part was I was with her for 24, you know, hours every 24/7 for 12 years, and I wasn't with her when she died. And I was only 30 feet away.
You were
Yeah.
with her. You were with her.
So the experience is very different. And then it takes a while, you know, I mean, it was almost a year when I came in the house alone one day and said, "My God, this is final."
Yeah.
It takes, you know, sinks in. It's a whole process that you go through, and people say stupid things like, you know, you'll get over it. You don't get over it, but anyway.
Yeah, she had a good run.
Yeah.
I hate all that kind of stuff.
I think
Well,
Shavira,
Yes.
I'll be
Shavira
driving
and-
along, and I'll still, in my car, I'll be driving along. And suddenly I have this desire to call my dad or my mom. Well, my dad died in the year 2000.
Yeah.
What the hell, you know? Seems to me I ought to get used to the idea.
George, you and Ned, I think, know this story, but my dad lived to 89, and he and my mother and about 6 other people were with me at a Bible study at the parish. And Dad read Paul to the Romans for the next Sunday's scripture. And as he finished, his elbows came up, he looked up to heaven, and he died.
Wow.
Right there in the middle of the Bible study with the scriptures and people that loved him. I mean, I aspire.
Yeah.
And I wish that for, and I've got a hunch Louis Del Castillo was blessed with that.
Yeah.
He was taken suddenly with a heart attack, right?
Yep. In Tennessee, came home, showered, sat on the bed with a towel around it, and then fell backward, and it was gone.
How long ago was that, Ned? It
Oh,
feels like it was so recent.
You know, it feels like it was recent, but it wasn't. It's,
It wasn't, yeah.
what is it, 12, 15 years ago, George?
Wow.
I would think at least.
He was a bigger than life kind of guy. I think that's one of the reasons that the question was asked about whether such an extrovert, had contemplative moments. And now he was a guy that was bigger than life. He was one of the oldest of a very large family whose mother sent the children out in New York to sell cards, greeting cards, in order to help the family survive. His dad, Louis, was born in Mexico City, and his father was a bright man working for the 3M company, and was asked to move to New York with the family to bring his team with him. And he got to New York and just could not adjust to the environment in every way, and had a nervous breakdown, and was then just incapable of any kind of productive living. And so his wife, I'm sorry, had these children. I think there were 8, 9. And, what's she gonna do? So they have some pretty bad memories of, as children, going out selling Christmas cards and other, greeting cards. And Louis was able to sell his cards, in the 20% of the time that it took his yeah. And he was he turned into the salesman. And through the suffering that he went through, he learned that he had to be alive, 100% more than everybody else. And he was always active. He could charm you. He wound up selling at one point yachts. And he
There's
sold
this guy from the barrio, a yacht salesman.
He sold so many that he had a wonderful home in Lakeland, Florida. His wife was a flight attendant. I think I mentioned to you previously that she'd called and said, help me stick it to United Airlines, and we did.
Well, she walked out of that famous crash into the cornfield.
Yes, she was in a plane that crashed, and I remember Lou. He was very even-tempered about that whole thing. He was an amazing guy, just an amazing guy, and to know that the finality of death had taken him just blew my mind. Absolutely blew my mind. I could not imagine his not being here. And that's what got me so angry with God. But
It was just a real quick thing. I said this was recently. Judge Teddy Howard has decided he's an atheist in the last 30 years or so.
God help us.
And Louis and Teddy were friends, but Louis's comment at some point was, sick and tired of arguing with these fucking atheists. And I just thought that was so funny. An apostolic mind, if ever there was one,
Yeah, he was done.
One of you have an insight how he got the call to come to the seminary? What brought that on?
Well, he was, are you asking me, John? I don't want to.
You or George, you knew him best, I think.
Yeah, well, he was quite a ladies' man.
And he figured out he could get laid a lot if he had a Roman collar.
That's the kind of the opposite. He told me that life was silly. He used the word silly a lot. It was silly to waste on frivolities. And he was very, very bright guy. And he thought that he best find God and flush all the frivolities. And
yeah, but
Yeah.
women found him irresistible.
He left the seminary. Oh my goodness. He left the seminary because he knew Georgianne before the seminary, and Bishop Pat Zeman married them about a month and a half before she gave birth to their baby, their child, and that's why he left the seminary.
Because she was pregnant?
Yes.
Oh.
Oh, he was still in the seminary.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good
And
reason.
That's why
I
he
mean,
left at the
when I
8
was in the
months of
seminary in those
pregnancy.
years, you never got out of the seminary except if you went on a walk with another guy. I'm trying to figure out how that.
I know. Yeah.
When I was in
Behind
Rome,
the orange trees.
when I was in Rome, Louis wrote me a letter saying how he remembered being in a basketball game with me, and everybody was fouling everybody. And I said, let's cut it out and let's play the game. And he was so impressed because everybody cut it out and started playing the game.
Oh,
People like Louis and Bob remember more about my life than I remember. I remember getting that email.
well, he could be a friend to anybody. He brought 4 or 5 of the Lakers to the seminary. Remember? Does anybody remember that?
I do. His
To
big buddy was Rudy De La what's his name? Rudy De La Russo?
LaRusso, yeah.
No.
Just he was larger than life, and very bright. I think I mentioned to you all that we had a philosophy professor who he was Father Berger, John Berger, and he was so focused in what he was doing. I don't think he was as much of a philosophy professor because he made us memorize Gret, and we were tested by having to fill in blanks on a 8-10 page exam. So we just simply had to memorize. And when he recognized Lou's experience and his just almost contrariness, he called him into his office. He was about 6'1", 6'2", and he called him into his room and said, "Louis, teach me about life. Tell me about the world. Give me your anecdotes of your friends. Fill my emptiness with respect to experience with yours." And they'd spend, an hour and a half, and one day, and half an hour another day. But he was in there very often. And that's the effect he had on so many people, liked everybody. I told you about Ted Howard, who George just mentioned, who's declared himself an atheist, who's a judge, very respected, still judging.
He's a great judge. He's a great guy.
Yeah. Well,
Do you think most
pardon me?
people like that who declare themselves atheists do it because they're scandalized by the church?
In large measure, in Ted's case.
This book that is, John, you gave me a copy of, and I think we've at least talked about it. He finally just gets very clear about the pedophilia that he found, and talked just a whole lot about it. And I think that's a big thing about Ted. But I mentioned to you that we were on a walk. It was cold. Ted's a very thin guy. He had a very thin white shirt. He wasn't supported a whole lot by, well, not at all by his mom and dad. His grandmother was the one who, to the extent anybody raised him. And so we're walking, and he's on his last shirt, and it's, very creased and
Moby.
Lou looks at him and he says, "God, you look really cold." Well, he's shivering. So he took his Letterman jacket off. He was a great athlete. All these letters and sewn in football and basketball and etc. And when we were done with our walk, Ted started to take the jacket off, and Louis said, "What are you taking that off for? That's yours. That's your jacket." And this was a very important for Lou, but he had no thought other than he needs it. It's his, and he was just that way. The
He just wasn't American. He didn't go for massive possessiveness.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, he could go anywhere with no money and live for a couple of months and just make friends and
start conning and
sell greeting cards again.
Yeah. Anyway,
Bob Bonneau, I'm watching you and wondering what you're thinking. Being there with your brother.
I need to go because
Okay.
the fellow that just came in to do exercises for my brother here. So
Yeah.
no sense in you getting that background.
Yes.
Yeah, I kind of messed up my times because I'm in Central Time here, and I was thinking that I could get in earlier, but I'll do my best for next week.
Great.
okay.
Bob,
Take
great
care.
to see
God
you.
bless, guys.
We'll
That
be
was
thinking
like
of
a
your brother.
great conversation.
Yeah.
We'll be thinking of your brother. Okay.
Thank you. Please do.
Bye-bye, Bob.
Bye.
Ned,
Just a quick comment about Teddy. He had a grandmother, Louise Ward Watkins, who was kind of a dowager empress or something. And she went back to the California of the Huntingtons in the turn of the century. And she, in her grand European tour as a young debutante in 1912, had actually been presented at the court of the Tsar in St. Petrograd. And for some reason, she liked me. I was a raving New Dealer even when I was 14, and she was anything but that. And so I was one of her pallbearers, but she was her son, one of Teddy's uncles was Admiral Watkins, who was the chief of naval operations under Reagan, and then retired from that and was Reagan's and H.W. Bush's AIDS czar. So it's not as if they were of distinguished lineage. They certainly were. She was a complete fanatical MacArthur fan.
Yeah, that's one of the big influences. She had a near-death experience, and told Teddy, "Theodore, there's nothing there. Nothing. There's nothing. After this, there's nothing." And that, coming from this very eminent woman who was the one who supported him in his needs, that's got to have been a huge influence in his conclusion.
Well, a near-death experience is not a death experience.
Right.
And most people who write about near-death experiences say the opposite of that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, including, even Alexander, the pediatric neurosurgeon in Boston, who
Right.
went to, I don't know if you read his book, but certainly he's someone he's at the top of science. He's a pediatric neurosurgeon at Children's Hospital in Boston and Mass General. So he's at the top of the science thing. And he had it from, I think it's bacterial meningitis. One of them, it's 90% fatal, and he came back from it, and he's written a book about it. And it's totally opposite, what her experience was in terms of, I'm somewhat skeptical of a lot of the near-death experiences because they're kind of cutesy little things that people, but when you have an eminent scientist like that, write a book like that, you kind of pay attention.
I read that book, Frank, and the trip that he went on was something else.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just totally mind-boggling. And then also the number of references, the footnotes. I mean, he was a scientist.
Yep.
And the number of colleagues that he got to admit that if they hadn't had a personal experience as physicians, they had conversations which blew their minds about people who did. So there are many, many, many other reports of, there's something there. So George, your comment about a near death ain't death.
I agree, absolutely.
Ned, I don't want to keep boring. You mentioned John Berger.
Yeah.
And he was our philosophy professor, and I agree with you. We never learned philosophy. We learned kind of what philosophers said, but we were not taught to philosophize any more than we were taught to theologize. I mean, I don't think we were, but I've met people who gone to Jesuit universities who were laymen who got more philosophy than we did. But John Berger was a driven man.
He was.
I remember him admiring Spanish. How did he say this? These guys would go out in Spain and stand there in their t-shirts, with their just t-shirts out in the middle of winter, just to prove that they could do it. And he would talk about guys reading books that they had to memorize, force themselves to memorize, and they would have a glue pot and they would memorize the pages and then close the page, and they would force themselves to memorize it. But John Berger was a driven man. Remember, when we were in the seminary, he was in an automobile accident. I think somebody was killed or seriously injured.
Mm-hmm. He had a crash with the woman that he killed.
Yeah, he was an alcoholic.
Yes.
And years later, after I was ordained, and I'm in Healdsburg, and I met some guy, I forget if it was part of a wedding that I did. And we started to talk, and he asked me, or I somehow mentioned that I had been down from Los Angeles. I went to the seminary, and he said, well, did you ever know John Berger? I said, well, yes, of course. I said, you know him? He said, yes. I introduced him to his wife. He and they had met at an AA meeting. He had left the priesthood.
And he called me about 10, 15 years ago, take your pick. And he was living in South Carolina on one of those offshore islands.
Oh.
And married.
Yes.
He said, do you really think you can know the truth? And I said, well, I know you're calling me right now. And it's true.
Yeah.
There's sufficient evidence. That's all you need.
But it's interesting when you say that he would call Louis del Castillo in to talk with him.
Yeah.
Because he was obviously struggling with his own
humanity.
That's what it sounds like, yeah.
And the same old trying to do it all on your own, trying to, close those pages of the glue pot and you're in charge when salvation is, and that's what alcoholics discover. I mean, those who get redeemed are that my life is unmanageable.
Yeah.
and all you can do is turn to something beyond yourself, you know.
I really liked him, Gary. He called me into his office one day, or his room, and he said, you know, he said some very nice things to me.
Oh, yeah.
But he said, you're all emotion. It's just lucky.
He was a very perceptive man, Father Berger.
He said it's lucky that your emotions are aligned with appropriately thought through philosophy. The way you move and act, while it's motivated purely by emotion, is consistent with reality.
Yeah, but he didn't know you very well.
But he sounds like me who's calling people in to tell them they've got what he hasn't.
Maybe
That could be.
I really liked him. The drivenness, Gary, that you're talking about, I admired that so much.
I liked him and I admired him.
In our philosophy class, he used to read us excerpts from the parish notes from this guy in Chicago who was what we would today call far right. And somehow or other that sticks in my mind of where he was coming from.
Yeah, and he was from Chicago, right?
Yeah.
Speaking
Frank,
of
did you
far-
have, in your philosophy course, did you have Josephus Gret in Latin?
I'll never regret having Gret. Because when I discovered Lonergan, the clarification by contrast was so healing.
Good
Yeah.
call. I like it.
Like Gret, I remember particularly his definition of quality, quantity. It's parts outside of parts. So what the hell does that mean? You never got the explanation from Gret.
Or from Berger.
Fred, by the way, Tom, you sent out, Fred, you sent out the article that you had written in Theological Studies.
That was a bold move.
Yeah, well, some woman had read the
that's
article and she wanted to give it to Bishop Barron. I
Yeah.
hope he reads your article more closely than he read the Atlantic Monthly article. But I just want to ask you, I know nothing about Lonergan at all. But if I read that article, well, because I've got it, I saved it. I've got it here on my computer. Well, I'll get a good sense of Lonergan from that article that you wrote.
But what I remember about it is I tried not to caricature people whose philosophy I didn't think was correct, but just say what they thought in an accurate way. That's kind of all I remember. But of course, that was before, that part of the article was before the hallelujah about Lonergan.
What?
Yeah, but I think you will get a kind of feel for him. Yeah, At
Because
least-
all of you seem to.
my fingers crossed.
It's a very difficult article, Gary.
What's that?
It's very difficult. I kind of browsed through it and I found it very difficult to comprehend.
This is Fred's
All the-
article.
Yeah,
Fred-
it's really loaded with all kinds of, right, Fred, everything, all kinds of references and
Many references and
I found it
footnotes.
difficult. Yeah, right. Just a whole tour de force of hermeneutics and everything.
Is it available? Is it available out there for some of us who come lately to this gathering?
I think you already got it.
You already got it
it's
in
in
your
a-
email.
It's in an attachment.
In the last 2 months?
Yeah.
Bob,
And
there's
In the last 2 weeks.
Unless you weren't included in Fred's email list, so maybe you didn't get it, but I'll send it to you.
Okay, George.
Yeah.
it's a woman, Fred, it's a woman who read your article and wanted, she said, if Lonergan were taught in all the seminaries, it would be, I guess, what a church changing or something, but she's from Winona, I guess. She wanted to talk to Bishop Barron about putting courses in Lonergan in the seminary. So that's
Yeah,
that's the email that
she was a former sister
ah
who became a lawyer.
ah
And so we had a lot of exchanges about law after that, her opening letter. Quite an intelligent lady, I think. And I think awfully nice too. And one of the things she's really realizing is that, we have our beliefs about morality and so forth and so on, but you can get too impatient with people who aren't going along with it and behaving differently. And she's very upset about that. And she thought Lonergan was helpful to be able to cool the mark with people who aren't on board with being sympathetic to people who don't agree with us. And so she likes her because he's flexible without being relativist. And I think that's a good idea.
One comment on Bishop Barron, Gary, that you brought up is, I don't know if you've noticed, but similar reactions to his, I can't figure out where he's going, to that Rosary article, were written by people like Phil Lawler, Father Z, who in his blog actually called Barron the champion of the Olympian middle. And Z is very intelligent, by the way. And so I don't know what's happening with him. He seems to also, in that conference he's having, that's why I hope that there's something that's a counterpoint to what he's talking. I looked up a lot of the people there, and, I don't think that they're going to be like the Vatican website. And that's why I was hoping that we'd get into that a little bit more, but maybe another time.
Another time. Yeah.
Well,
And Lawler too.
Yeah,
well,
I have no
I knew
use
Lawler.
for
He was a
Brother
parishioner
Lawler.
of mine. His father was a parishioner of mine 50, 60 years ago. So
Wow, sir.
Yeah.
I subscribed to his magazine when I first came back to practicing Catholicism. Just, I took National Review, Catholic World Report, First Things, America and Commonweal all at once, just to get a spectrum. And I thought Lawler was insane. It's always in a rage, always ready to, celebrate the commemoration of the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. I mean, just off the charts. Can I say one thing? Somebody, George, it was you, said a thing about by James Carroll to the effect that the Supreme Court Catholics were undermining Vatican II by their jurisprudence. And I kind of liked James Carroll in the late 60s, and I read a couple of his books, and I thought he was pretty cool. But that's one of the stupidest things anybody could say, I thought. I mean, Vatican II called abortion an unspeakable crime. And how, if you hem in abortion, are you being faithless to Vatican II? I mean, to be faithful to Vatican II, you should stomp on it and napalm it and everything else you could do to, given what Vatican II said.
Yeah, I think he's thinking more of the originalist way of looking at things, kind of going back to, what is it, Fred? Classicism or classical? Anyway, a type of thinking, not just that one thing about abortion, but going way back to where there's no more historical context to anything. It's kind of like a gross fundamentalism. That's the way I
Okay,
see his
okay, so
criticism.
he was
Yeah,
over my head.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
This reference to the digital New Yorker, the online New Yorker article that was
Yes.
part of our back and forth during.
No, I
the
think it was in the Atlantic Monthly, wasn't it, George? His Carol's article.
Oh, I thought it was in the New Yorker, but I'm
Well,
not
wherever
sure.
it was, yeah, wherever it was, it's pretty recent, right? Within a
Yeah, it was a
last
week ago.
month, yeah. Yeah, and it's
originalism really is what Lonergan called the principle of the empty head. That
Empty head.
you're going back, you already said it, leaving out any historical context,
yeah,
as if you were really getting to exactly the meaning of the original text,
yeah.
which is bullshit.
The empty head.
To quote
you go.
William Barr.
Yeah, I was at a, the way it really comes down, I was at a gun safety rally in Oakland after Parkland, with a lot of high school kids up on the stage in Oakland talking about guns and violence and so forth. And there was somebody with a poster that says something like 1776 rules for 2020 weapons. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous, for the AR-15 and the muskets people had, and they had no concept of whatever. And the same thing with the Electoral College, the world was much different. So people that don't see historical context to me, that's what Carol's getting at. It's really, and it's amazing that
we are so stuck with the Electoral College. It's in the Constitution.
The AR-15 of today was the musket back then. Go figure.
Well,
About
somebody
empty
explained
head.
to me, those muskets were 60 caliber weapons. And if
Small
you
cannon.
got hit with a musket ball, you were in deep trouble.
Small cannons, yeah.
Yeah.
But it was one cannonball at a time.
Yeah,
Yes.
it wouldn't automatically load.
I'm surprised that Carol is writing again, because he wrote a book within the past year or two, which is almost like a cri de coeur that things haven't gone his way.
Yeah, you mean the one on celibacy?
Huh?
Um,
No, it was just the whole thing about what happened in the church and how he got
priesthood?
continuously alienated, and that now he's come to the conclusion that he's not going to go to church anymore because of this. And so for him to start writing again positively about Vatican II, if it's positive, it's really puzzling, because that book was like an old man complaining that things didn't go his way.
Isn't he?
well, I don't see it that way, Frank. I don't see it as his way. I think it's a different way of looking. I don't see it as kind of an egotistical. I reverberated a lot to what he said, because maybe I'm the same type of old man that things haven't gone my
We
way
all
either.
are.
Well,
But that, I'm talking about the book, not the article. If you read the
Yeah,
book.
yeah, I did read some of the book. Yeah, I did. Yeah.
isn't he the guy that says we had to throw out the crucifixion?
The
Yeah,
what?
that's the Constantine's cross.
Yeah, yeah.
That's when I gave up on him, honestly.
Well, even
Constantine's sword, yeah.
So,
yeah, well,
the Jews.
well, I agree with a lot of his analysis. I think the very fact, if I didn't grow up Catholic and I saw Roman Catholic, why is it called Roman Catholic Church? Is that what the followers of Jesus should be called? Roman? Why is it Roman? Why isn't it London Catholic or Paris Catholic? Or, why should it be Roman Catholic? That already sets it up with the empire.
I don't think so.
Yeah, to me it does.
It's just a
What does Roman
historical
mean?
accident.
If you get into what Roman means, it's not anything that Jesus said.
You can be a
Well,
San
first off-
Diego Catholic.
I know. It's just
what was
all
that?
I'm saying is when you get beyond the little group that you're in, there's some pretty strange things when you look at it from the outside.
Come on,
Of course.
Yeah.
Come on, you guys, stop riling George up.
Yeah, but I don't want to get into it. That's a whole other.
Well, yeah,
That's a whole other session.
it's almost
Yeah,
it's
but
10
the-
after 12.
Yeah,
Let me just say one thing though. I mean,
Having
our
having-
behavior towards the Jews for 1900 years, 1950 years, whatever it was an abomination. We can't defend it. You know, it was, we poisoned the soul of Europe in which Hitler grew, you know, etc. I agree with everything he says about that. So his remedy is let's get rid of the cross as a symbol of Christianity. You know, let's take the cross out of our theology, or at least our iconography.
That craters everything.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. I'd have to read that and see what he was getting at, but
Well, Constantine's sword.
yeah.
James Carroll. James Carroll gave a talk.
James Carroll, not John Carroll. James Carroll, thank you.
James Carroll
It's
gave
called
a talk
Constantine's sword.
about
Yeah, it's a
about
good book.
post-Constantinian Catholicism, which was along the lines you guys are talking about.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
The guy who responded to him was this wonderful Jewish guy. And he said, you know, it reminds me of when I was living in Brooklyn. It depended on where you lived in Brooklyn, whether you would be called Bernstein or Bernstein.
Well, I'm gonna have to bug out.
Yep.
Yeah.
On that happy note, we probably all should bug out. We're 11
I
minutes.
will be, I have a funeral on Monday. I was supposed to be in the Northwest this week, but I postponed it. So I will be leaving on Tuesday. I'll be back around the 11th of September. So I'll be out the next week or two.
I'm going to be
Thank you
out
for the
until
conversation.
Thanksgiving because I'm teaching on Fridays from 1 to 3.
Oh my.
And
Well,
I may
then there
be
will
out.
still be a market for the recordings.
Oh yeah, I'll go
Yes.
to the
Oh,
recording.
yeah.
Yeah.
Comment.
Yeah, I may be out a bit too. Okay.
Pax et bonum.
God bless you all, and
Take care.
have a good week, and we'll see you next week, either live virtually or by recording by delayed recording virtually or whatever.
Thanks for your good work, Tom.
Thank
God
you,
bless
Tom.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. God bless.